Thank you very much for allowing me to present on Assembly Bill 2943.
AB 2943 will help label conversion therapy, the dangerous, discredited idea that you can change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity, as what it is, consumer fraud, as a fraudulent snake oil salesman type of practice.
This bill would narrowly apply in cases where a consumer transaction has taken place.
This legislation will codify protections that could save thousands of lives. They can't change what we never chose.
I mean, I was in conversion therapy myself for 5 years. My family spent $35,000 on my conversion therapy. The promises that were given to my parents were fraudulent.
It is not the intent to go after religion or to churches, but rather this fraudulent practice itself.
I'm a fraud.
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 They think I'm a fraud.
According to this bill, I'm a fraud.
I want to talk to you today about my story of coming out of homosexuality.
I became a Christian when I was about 11 years old. Pretty soon after that, I started developing unwanted same-sex attractions.
I came out in my early 20s as a lesbian. I fully embraced that identity. I lived and loved being a lesbian.
I grew up with same-sex attraction, but I didn't like the feeling. I wanted the feelings to go away.
I was created male, but everything inside me seemed to tell me a different story.
After I came to faith, I really started to wrestle with it as if oh, I should probably address this now. I felt totally alone. I didn't feel like it was safe for me to say anything.
I used to live the gay lifestyle. I was a broken man. As you get older, you find out who you really are.
I want to leave the homosexual lifestyle. I don't want anything to do with this. It's so destructive. It's so harmful. And nobody talks about that.
I heard the Lord say to me in that still small voice, choose. And it wasn't an easy choice. It was a very hard choice. It's the hardest choice I've ever made. I ended up connecting with a Bible study of people that were like me, who were being transformed by following the Lord and His Word.
I began to develop affection for a man. Eventually, I married him. Today, we've been married for 13 years.
Today, I live as a married man of 6 years with two of the most incredible young sons and a wife that loves me and a baby on the way. Change is possible. Because of Jesus' death on the cross, we can live a new life. We are a new creation in Christ Jesus.
I'm now married. Got married in July 2009. We'll be celebrating 9 years of marriage and 2 kids, and we have a little girl on the way.
That's what it means to live in America. There's no coercion.
And that's why it's so important that this legislation that is in California right now, that's almost passed all the way through into law, AB 2943 completely destroys my human experience. This legislation, 2943, actually takes away rights from those that are questioning their sexuality. We don't want to see an America where the government is controlling how we identify sexually.
In America, you would never think that the Bible could be banned, but that's in fact what could happen in California if AB 2943 passes. This bill would prevent so-called conversion therapy, sometimes referred to as sexual orientation change efforts, and add it to the list of fraudulent schemes under the state's Consumer Legal Remedies Act. AB 2943 declares advertising offering to engage in or engaging in sexual orientation change efforts with an individual is fraudulent business practices. If approved, victims of sexual abuse could no longer get counsel if they develop, as often happens, unwanted urges to engage in same-sex behavior or become gender confused. This bill would also make it unlawful for any person to sell books, including the Bible, counseling services, or anything else that directs people to trust in Jesus Christ to help them overcome unwanted same-sex attractions or gender confusion. We know from personal experience, having many friends who have been gender confused or have been in a same-sex lifestyle with regards to urges that are unwanted or behavior that are unwanted as well. And through the power of Jesus Christ, they've been changed. In fact, 1 Corinthians chapter 6 lists a series of sins, adultery, idolatry, and other kinds of behavior, including homosexuality. And the writer, Paul, is writing to the people in Corinth saying, such were some of you. In other words, by the grace of Jesus Christ, you have been changed from that activity, that behavior, from that sinful lifestyle. That kind of passage, putting it on a billboard or in a brochure, would be banned under this bill. Pray that this bill never becomes law, but stand with Liberty Counsel as we stand with counselors, adults, churches, and people who believe in freedom of speech and the free exercise of religion. To oppose this bill, we stand ready to file suit to stop this outrageous attack on the First Amendment and our freedom of religion. Go to Liberty Counsel's website for more information, lc.org.
The California legislature is pushing a new law that really should scare people. It essentially bans the sale of particular books. I am not kidding. This is something that is happening in the state of California. So according to David French over at National Review, Assembly Bill 2943 would make it an unlawful business practice to engage in a transaction intended to result or that results in the sale or lease of goods or services to any consumer that advertise, offer to engage in, or do engage in sexual orientation change efforts with an individual. The bill then defines sexual orientations change efforts as any practice that seeks to change an individual's sexual orientation. This includes efforts to change behaviors or gender expressions, or to eliminate or reduce sexual or romantic attractions or feelings toward individuals of the same sex. Okay, this is insane. I'm sorry, this is insane. This bill is totally crazy. It doesn't matter whether you believe that conversion therapy works. I think the evidence on that is at best mixed and leaning very strongly toward no. But that does not mean that you shouldn't be able to read a book about how to fight particular urges or that urge you to behave in certain ways, right? The entire religious worldview is that you have lots of urges, right? We all have lots of urges, and a lot of those urges are bad for you, and you should resist those urges as much as possible. But under California law, such books could be banned in the state of California. Like, really. And even worse, it says it includes efforts to change behaviors or gender expressions. So in other words, if I have a 3-year-old kid, and that 3-year-old kid is expressing that they want to be the opposite sex, I can't take that kid to a therapist who's going to who's going to try to make sure that my kid's feelings of gender disorientation are alleviated. I don't have the ability to do that in the state of California. How in the world is that constitutional? The answer is it's not constitutional. The answer is also that folks on the left in California don't care. So when we talk about tyranny coming in the guise of a happy face, well, this is what we're talking about. The folks on the left in California suggesting, of course, that gender expression is innately baked into the cake, that sexual orientation is innately baked into the cake, and that any attempt by anyone to say any different should be illegal in the state of California is fully crazy and fully violative of First Amendment basic freedoms. It's also not true. Okay, it's also not true. Human behavior changes on a regular basis. Now, I'm not talking about your desires. Your desires may not be changeable, but it is a fact that when it comes to, for example, gender expression, 80% of all kids who identify as cross-gender when they are young grow out of it by the time they are teenagers. And you're now telling me that I have to reinforce that at the state level, and that if I don't, the state is going to sue me? The state is going to punish me? And remember, this isn't just seeking the services of a psychiatrist. This is if I even buy a book about this. If Barnes & Noble carries a book about how to deal with a child who's suffering from gender dysphoria, and that book suggests that you don't have hormone treatment or humor it, that this may actually be a violation of California state law? I mean, this is insane. It's totally crazy. As David French writes, to take one example, large numbers of children who exhibit gender dysphoria eventually desist. Their dysphoria resolves itself as they grow older. Indeed, there's serious research indicating that this is the most likely outcome for a child with gender dysphoria. But under AB 2943, the very act of communicating this truthful and indeed hopeful message could very well lead to legal jeopardy. Not just that, you can see a world in which California goes even further than this and starts taking children out of homes. If you're a parent who says, listen, my little girl is not a little boy, no matter what she says, then you could see the state saying you are now engaging in child endangerment. I cannot imagine the Supreme Court of the United States would uphold this law. I just can't imagine it. Now, maybe a couple of the justices will try to uphold the law, some of the more radical justices, but I just can't imagine that the Supreme Court would say this doesn't violate the First Amendment. It very, very obviously violates the First Amendment. It has already passed through 2 committees by 8-2 and 8-1 margins. It may come up for an assembly vote this week. And of course, this is the future of California is the future of the left. So if you wonder why folks on the right are so unwilling to make bargains with folks on the left about social issues, this is the reason. Because social leftists are interested in not only changing minds, but enforcing that change on people from above using the power of government. I mean, this is truly evil stuff. Suggesting to people they shouldn't be able to buy books they want to buy, suggesting to people that they shouldn't be able to bring kids to the therapist they want to bring kids to, is just insane and evil. It really is. And the fact that California is pursuing it demonstrates how crazy the left has gone on social issues particularly.